Thanks for joining me, Madam Horror, for your bedtime scary stories. If you have a story you would like read on this channel, send it to me at madamhorror1@gmail.com. Hit the like and subscribe buttons, and we'll dive deeper into the unknown. Tonight, Tales of the Backwoods. I was a senior girl guide ranger for 2 years in Canada. There's a private lake out near the mountains we would take the younger girls to, as the lake was shallow and great for canoe lessons. I never liked the site, as it was more of a swamp, and therefore always smelled like rotten eggs. But it was fun to go up there with my unit. We were all really good friends, an odd cast of characters in general. Despite our differences in interests, one thing we all shared was our belief in the paranormal. Particularly myself, my sister, and our resident, who is pretty much impossible to scare. Anyway, about a year ago, we were out there for our annual backpacking trip. There were about 7 of us, minus the leaders. We were tenting in a meadow that was about 5-minute walk from the bathrooms, and a 10-minute walk from the boat launch or main recreational area. The woods in that area are super dense, and at night, it's pretty much impossible to see 2 feet ahead of you. Our second night, halfway through the trip, I got up in the middle of the night to use the washroom. Since we are in bear country and it is also pitch black, I woke up my sister to come with me. The path to the bathrooms was narrow and dark, even with our flashlights. As we walked, I started getting increasingly paranoid that something was following us through the trees. My sister had noticed it too. There was a brush moving somewhere in the distance, like something was walking next to us as quietly as possible. By the time we made it to the outhouse, I was well and truly scared out of my mind. As I was waiting for my sister to be done, standing in the clearing with my light out, the thing that we had heard grew closer. This weird snuffling noise, almost like a bear, started emanating from the trees around me. Now I know what a bear sounds like. Whatever that was, it was not a bear. It sounded more like labored breathing, if the person breathing had had their throat shredded by a weed whacker. It was wet and loud and getting very close. I banged on the outhouse door, yelling for my sister to get out, and when she did, her eyes were just as big as I imagined mine were. We sprinted back to camp, relying on our dim flashlights and muscle memory to get us back safe. That noise followed us all the way back. In the morning, at breakfast, I asked her if she had heard anything weird the previous night. She nodded, and when I recounted the story to her, she confirmed that she had heard the noise too. Concerned, we went to our leaders, who were talking to the leaders of a guide group staying down at the other side. The guide leaders were talking about packing up early because of a weird noise that had occurred sometime during the night and scared all the girls. Creepy, right? It gets worse. That day we were supposed to be marking exit trails with flagging tape. We'd split off into groups of 4, and although I didn't experience anything particularly out of the ordinary, my sister did. Here's what she told me. Their path took them up a hill we call the Ridge. The ridge is the highest point in the camp, and should you struggle your way up to the top, you will be rewarded with a gorgeous view of the whole area. As they were standing there, one of the girls suddenly froze up and stared down the hill at something. My sister and the 2 other girls that were standing there turned to ask what she was looking at, only to be struck speechless by what they saw. There was something humanoid watching them from the meadow. Tall, thin, staring straight at them. It was too bright to look at, almost painful in its light. It watched them for a moment longer, and then they blinked and it was gone. To this day, we still don't know what it was. But whatever had stalked us that night, it had not been there to play. I was traveling solo around the Olympic Peninsula in Washington State and making various stops in the Olympic National Park. I decided to stop in Quinault for the first time and took a random road that dead-ended at a beautiful spot at the edge of the Quinault River. There was an ancient footbridge that led across the river, but it looked like it might collapse if I tried to cross it, so I decided not to. It was off-season and I was not in a tourist area. I was the only one there. It was so unusually hot outside that I decided that I needed to get into the water. I backed my car all the way to the edge of the dead-end road, faced it out in the direction I would need to leave, and started hiking through the thick brush down an embankment to the edge of the water. There was no path. It was a pretty rugged area. It was mid-fall, and I didn't have a suit since I didn't plan on swimming, so I just took my clothes off and got in the water in my bra and underwear. I had a nice swim, but I could not shake the feeling that I was being watched, even though I was in the middle of nowhere. About 5 minutes later, the creepy feeling was enough for me to want to head back. So I started to climb out, turned my back to the other side of the river, and walked toward my clothes and shoes that I had left behind. When I turned around, there was a big, tall man standing in plain view, just across from me on the other side of the river, but higher up on this embankment than I was on mine. He was wearing a poncho made of animal pelts, had long hair full of sticks and twigs, and looked like he had been living out in the wild for a very long time. We stood and stared at each other, me frozen in terror for what felt like forever, when all of a sudden, he frantically took off in the direction of the footbridge leading across the water. I grabbed my car key, tried to grab my clothes and shoes, but they got tangled up in some blackberry vines, so I left everything and went running for my life, through the thick brush and blackberries, barefoot in my underwear, trying to make it to my car before he made it across the river. There was no doubt in my mind that he was trying to harm me. When I made it out of the blackberries, I could see he was crossing the bridge towards me rapidly. I got to my car and flung my door open just as he arrived. I locked the doors while he pounded on the hood of my car, just screaming and grunting non-verbally. The moment he went for my driver's side door, I hit the gas and took off as fast as I could. I looked back and he was chasing after me. He must have run after my car for at least a mile until he faded from view. I was bleeding everywhere from running nearly naked through the blackberries. I was wet, unclothed, shaking and crying. Had I hesitated for literally 10 seconds longer, I don't think I would have made it out alive. Even typing this story out again all these years later, I am starting to shake. I felt like I was being hunted. That is the only way I can describe it. I will never, ever go back out to that area. Since that moment, I always bring a hiking buddy with me when I venture out into the forest. That day is going to haunt me for the rest of my life. This happened to me numerous times in my life. The worst happened when I was around 9 or 10. I lived in rural Maine, and my neighborhood was surrounded by thick pine forest for miles on end. A short way from my house there was a big lake, and you could walk there through the woods behind my house. It was a short walk, and me and my dad would often go fishing there, as it was calming, and our neighborhood didn't have any kids in it. I had to find entertainment some other way. This time we were packing up after we called it quits, and my dad began walking off back to the house, as he often did, while I was packing up my fishing gear. It was evening, and the sky was beginning to get darker, and I remember the forest being a deep red-orange from the evening light. With me, my family's great big husky mix Yukon, who was wandering around me. I eventually packed all my stuff, picked up my fishing rod and tackle box, and began walking back to the house. Yukon followed close behind me, sometimes stopping to sniff at a rotting log or stump, his footsteps never too far. Once the light fell below the horizon, though, he never strayed far. The forest was now only black, the only light coming from the clip-on light fastened to my baseball cap. Everything was black and white while it was illuminated by my cap light, the trees thin and gray while the space behind them was inky black. I felt fine as I had walked this way dozens of times at night. I remember Yukon stopping and whining at something, and me turning around to see what was the matter. He was nervously glancing around, his neck fur bristling and his ears perked up. He was a big dog, at least 80 pounds, and my father always insisted that he was part wolf. It was unlike him to be nervous like this. I looked up into the woods behind me, and suddenly I was overcome with dread. I had never felt this feeling before, and to this day I have never felt it since. It wasn't just fear, it was full-on, primal, fight or flight. If I don't leave right now, I will surely be dead in a few seconds. I booked it down the trail towards my house, Yukon close behind. I soon broke out of the trees into my backyard, shooting up the gentle hill and throwing open my back door and slamming it shut behind me. I was breathing heavily, and Yukon was panting quickly. My dad was sitting on the couch looking at me, dumbfounded. I explained everything, and he just laughed, claiming there were some eerie things going on in those woods. I never believed him, but I still can't find out what caused me to run like that, because when I looked behind me, all I could see were the pine trees, pale in the beam of my cap light. In the early 80s, when I was 8, my family was visiting my uncle, who lived in Backwoods, Missouri. He lived on a lot of land, and the only other people who really even lived on the street were relatives, so no one else ever just happened to be out there. This meant no one ever locked their doors, because random family members were always coming by for this or that. One night while we were there, my parents and aunt and uncle decided to go to a nearby town to go bowling. My brothers, who were 11 and 12, my female cousins, 6 and 14, and I, female, stayed home. It was still daylight when the adults left, but it started raining pretty hard and got dark quickly. We used to play this game that was essentially hide and seek in a dark house, but we cleverly called it vampire. There was this thin little mattress on the living room floor that some of the kids would sleep on at night. So the person who was it would lie on the mattress and fold it over themselves like a coffin and count down to midnight. When it got to midnight, they went looking for you. Again, all of the lights are off, and you tried to make it back to the coffin before you got caught. Because the house was in the country, it was pitch black at night. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face. What this meant for the game was that, 1, you couldn't tell where the vampire was looking, so you just had to make a break for it, and 2, you were extremely lazy, and I'm sure by now you can guess which one of us met those standards. You could hide in the living room with the coffin and get to base quickly. Ben, my 11-year-old brother, was it and was doing the normal countdown. I was hiding maybe 6 feet from him. As he's counting, there's a flash of lightning. I don't know if I was already looking at the living room window or if the lightning made me look. But with the backlight of the lightning, I see a man with his face against the window. He had his hands on each side of his face as if he's trying to peer in, and looks exactly like the stereotypical creepster. Heavy-set, scraggly beard, etc. I could feel every hair on my body standing on end. Immediately, I began trying to convince myself that I didn't see what I saw. But then Ben sternly whispered, "If anyone is hiding in here, stay still." I sort of croaked out an, "I'm here," right as there was another flash of lightning. Creepster was still there, but was no longer trying to look in the window. Instead, he was now looking toward the front door. Ben and I immediately knew what was coming next. From where he was standing, Creepster was probably only 5 feet from the front door. Ben was the same distance, but there was a couch between him and the door. Ben leapt over the couch and locked the door right as Creepster started trying the handle. At this point, I guess Ben decided that it would be best to let Creepster know that people were home and that we knew he was there, because he flipped on the porch light and then started turning on the lights in the house. This is going to sound weird, but I was too terrified to panic. Having said that, I was relying completely on Ben to know and tell me what to do. He told me to go lock the other doors and was yelling for everyone else to come out and lock all of the windows. Honestly, the next few minutes are hazy in my mind. I remember everything up to this point extremely clearly, and I remember the end very clearly. But I'm less clear about the middle. I know that I locked the side door and then the sliding glass door on the back of the house. When we've talked about it over the years, some people remember us seeing him out the back door as well. I don't think I remember that. What I clearly recall is locking the sliding glass door and standing there frozen, hearing Ben, in a very calm but firm voice, say, "Close the curtain. Listen to me, okay? Close the curtain." So I did. Ben can't remember that part, and I just remember my fear and Ben's voice, so I'm not sure if I saw Creepster in the backyard or not. We tried to call the police, but my aunt and uncle had a stupid party line, and it wouldn't even work, whether from the storm or from a neighbor leaving it off the hook. For the record, they are the only people I've ever known with a party line, so this wasn't normal to me either. But for those of you who don't know what it is, in really rural areas, multiple people on the street will actually share a phone line. It would have different rings for different households, but you could pick up the phone and listen to your neighbor's conversation. We also tried to summon help on my uncle's CB radio. Couldn't reach anyone. My uncle was a hunter, so he had a gun rack full of rifles in his room, but my older cousin was on an out-of-town hunting trip and took them with him. All we could find was a BB gun that looked like a real rifle. I vividly remember Ben putting me on phone duty and Scott, my older brother, on CB duty, while he stood watch at the little square window on the front door with the BB gun. Maybe 30 minutes later, Ben said, "He's back. He's coming up the driveway." The rest of us froze in fear, but Ben opened the door and stepped out on the porch, pointed the gun and said, "Get out of here, right now." Then we hear our cousin Kyle, who lived down the road a bit, say, "You know that's a BB gun, right?" Even though Kyle was only 15, I remember that we felt like we had been saved when he showed up. Kyle seemed really skeptical of our story, like we were playing a trick on him, even though we had no idea that he was coming. But he stayed with us until our parents came home. Honestly, I don't even remember if we told our parents what happened when they got home. There were definitely no police involved, though. We just went on with our trip. But we never played vampire again without some mention of that night. I hope you enjoyed tonight's scary stories. If you did, remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons. If you have a story that you would like read on this channel, please send it to me at madamhorror1@gmail.com. Join me next time for more tales of the unknown.